So the Shangri-La dialogue, this is the 20th anniversary. Why is it so important for you and the government to be engaged in it?
Well, it's just a unique opportunity. I mean, this is one of the biggest gathering of defence ministers, of think tanks, of the strategic community that happens in the world, certainly the biggest in our region.
And so your counterparts, defence ministers from all UK, US, right across the region? Yep.
Right across the world. So in that sense, we will be meeting with ministers from ASEAN, some of the Pacific, met with Fiji on Friday, as an example. But there are also the British the Defence Secretary is here, I should say. The US Defence Secretary is here. So in fact, you get Defence Secretaries and Ministers from right around the world who are coming to this meeting.
We can see here people in uniform right across the place. So we're talking about ministers, but generals as well.
And chiefs of defence force.
How open is the dialogue? How open is the discussion?
Well, it's open in the sense that you do get a feeling for the views that each country has, the directions that they're going, what they're trying to achieve with their defence forces. I mean, obviously countries have their own confidential secrets which are not going to be shared here. You wouldn't expect that. But the human interaction, that human dimension to it, where you see the colour of people's eyes, you get a sense of what matters to them. That you get all of that here, in all its texture.
Well, we talk about the Prime Minister getting to know world leaders and having that rapport, but for you as Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, is that also an important capacity to say, be able to get on the phone, call Lloyd Austin of the United States or Ben Wallace of the United Kingdom, or for that matter, those that aren't our allies? Can you do that too?
100%. So, I first met Lloyd Austin at this event last year, the US Defence Secretary. Hope to see him again this year. But the point is that over the course of the last 12 months, I've seen Lloyd on numerous occasions, but that relationship began here. Ben Wallace, again, who's the UK Defence Secretary, someone I've had a lot to do with over the course of the last 12 months. Looking forward to catching up with him in this forum. It's a really important opportunity to meet people, to get to see what they're on about, and to build that personal rapport, which is very important.
A year ago, almost to the day, you met your Chinese counterpart face to face. That was the first ministerial contact in nearly 3 years. That relationship, it's gone a long way in the 12 months, hasn't it?
It has, and it was a very significant moment a year ago, and as we had literally just taken office. So this was the first overseas trip that I was doing.
And it was in this hotel, wasn't it?
It was definitely in this hotel, and I can remember in the lead up to it thinking about the significance of that moment. And it was not necessarily clear that meeting would take place, but when it became apparent that it was going to, and we had, I think, about 24 hours to really properly prepare for it, it was a pretty significant event. And I think that's what's played out in the course of the last 12 months has borne that out. I mean, we've seen numerous meetings now at a ministerial level. Our Foreign Minister Penny Wong has done one of those meetings in Beijing. Our Trade Minister Don Farrell has done the same. And of course we had the meeting in November between Prime Minister Albanese and President Xi. All of that is a lot of dialogue and talk matters, but there's also been outcome. We've seen much of the trade we put back in place. There's thousands of jobs which are a part of that. In my space, in that first meeting a year ago, what we wanted to re-establish was the formal defence dialogue between our two countries, which is just important in terms of making sure that we don't see miscalculation, that there is an understanding as our two militaries interact, which has occurred. What we are now seeing is the beginnings of the defence dialogue occur. We had the first of those meetings back in March. The relationship is being stabilised.
I want to talk to you about that, because the Prime Minister goes into that sort of question about the dialogue and the guardrails in the relationship with China in the keynote address that he gave here in Singapore. But before we get to that, just in broader terms, how difficult was it for the Prime Minister to land that balance in that keynote between addressing the rising China and its aggression on the one hand, but not wanting to jeopardise the thaw in relations and the improving trade ties on the other?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and you're right that we are, walking a line here, and it's important that we do get the balance right. That said, I think we've been really clear in how to strike that balance. We want to work with China where we can. We will disagree with China where we must. That has really been the mantra of how we have sought to manage the relationship. And when you think about that in terms of the way in which we engage with China, you can make this happen. It is possible to walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think at the heart of this is being very clear with China, but with the world, in fact, in all of our engagements, where we stand, what we are seeking to do, being professional, I think being polite, but making it very clear what we're about, that there are no surprises. And that's how we've sought to go about things, which is not really, there's not rocket science there. That's just trying to be adult, mature, professional. And I think that gets you a long way. And so we have been able to make clear to China our anxieties, and there are clearly a number, and we are seeing a very significant military build-up, which is not being accompanied by strategic reassurance, and we have expressed our concern about that. We also want to have the most productive relationship we can with our largest trading partner, and we're clear about that too.
When you talk about that dialogue and being upfront with people, I guess Mr Albanese quoted the Singapore Prime Minister on that issue. He says, Prime Minister Lee said, big powers have a heavy responsibility to maintain stable and workable relations with one another, and it goes to those guardrails we talk about in terms of having a dialogue. Is this speech from the Prime Minister, is this basically a signal to the region that your government is going to seek to encourage that China-US dialogue more and more now?
I think what we're really trying to say here is this, that nothing is inevitable, that we have agency. Each of our countries, but collectively as a region, we have agency about the future relations that occur, but whether or not we walk down paths of war or peace. And we need to be exercising our agency to create pathways for peace. And that's what Australia will seek to do. And that does encourage dialogue between great powers. I mean, obviously China and America have their own relationship. We lead, in a sense, by example, coming back to the very specific of a defence dialogue between Australia and China. At the heart of that is about making sure that there are no misunderstandings. It's a really important conversation to have. That's an example of the kind of conversations that we need to promote throughout the region. And from there, trying to then focus on what is really our core interest, which is the collective security of the region, but the maintenance of a system of rules within the region, the global rules-based order, that we resolve disputes by reference to rules, not by reference to might and power. And that's very much at the heart of what the Prime Minister was saying.
And this is the point that I think many in the region have noticed, that there's been that equilibrium in the relationship, but the government has been deliberate not to compromise on national interests. In fact, the Prime Minister said quite bluntly in his keynote that the nation should be allowed to pursue opportunities for our people without fear of coercion or retribution. That's a very blunt message to China, given our recent history.
Well, but it is a self-evident comment. We need to live in a world which is guided by rules, where countries are not, where the ability for countries to pursue their interests, to make their own sovereign decisions, is not a function of size and power. It's a function of rules and nationhood and sovereignty. And that countries should be able to be free to pursue those interests without a fear of coercion. I mean, that's the point that the Prime Minister is making. And underpinning that is really the idea that we want to live in a world where there is a clear, respected, rules-based order. And that is very much at the heart of the government's response to the Defence Strategic Review, and it was very much at the heart of the Prime Minister's speech.